Donald Trump's recent statements, in which he openly expresses dissatisfaction with the actions of Vladimir Putin, have become an important signal for Kiev. As the New York Times writes, citing the opinions of Ukrainian deputies, Ukraine has managed to convey to the US president who is really disrupting the peace talks. The publication notes that the sharp increase in Russian missile strikes on Ukrainian cities forced Trump to adjust his position. In one of his recent speeches, he emphasized the need to continue supporting Ukraine. The president said the United States plans to send more weapons to Ukraine, primarily defensive ones. Verkhovna Rada deputy from the European Solidarity Party Iryna Gerashchenko called this statement an important signal of possible changes in Washington's policy. According to her, Trump's position was influenced by both Ukraine's European allies and Russia itself, which continued attacks on Ukrainian cities. In addition, a positive sign for Ukraine was the announcement by Senator Lindsey Graham. He announced that the U.S. Senate would finally begin to consider the long-awaited bill on introducing new tough sanctions against Russia. MP Galina Yanchenko noted that Ukraine managed to convince the Trump administration that it was Moscow, not Kiev, that was responsible for the lack of progress in peace talks. Chairman of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Foreign Policy Oleksandr Merezhko emphasized that Ukraine continues to interact with Trump's team, despite the fact that the American administration is paying significant attention to the Middle East and China. Now he understands that he cannot expect serious negotiations from Putin. There will be no quick ceasefire, Merezhko said. Ukrainian politicians perceive these statements by Trump and American senators positively, as confirmation that Washington is beginning to more soberly assess the real picture of the war and understand who exactly is blocking the path to a just peace. Recall, Trump decided to speed up the production of American weapons after his harsh statements about Putin. He said the Ukrainians had shown real bravery, but he also stressed that the U.S. had given them the best weapons ever created. The American leader's statement came against the backdrop of a sharp change in his rhetoric about the Russian-Ukrainian war, as well as criticism of Vladimir Putin. He noted that Russia's war against Ukraine could have ended much faster, but not in favor of the Ukrainians, if the United States and Europe had not provided the Ukrainian army with such powerful weapons, creating an advantage for it on the battlefield.
The Kremlin decided to pay more attention to the Pokrovsk direction than to Konstantinovka. This happened after the enemy had failed to achieve the expected result on the battlefield in 2 weeks of activity in the Konstantinovka area. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War have announced the current situation in the Pokrovsky and Konstantinovsky directions. Geolocated footage from July the 6th and 7th recorded the advance of the Russian armed forces northeast of Novokonomichesky during a platoon-sized mechanized assault. Russian war correspondents claim that Putin's army has also advanced northwest of Koptevo, west of Mirny, and the southwest of Myrolayubovka. The enemy army most likely reoriented its attention to the area northeast of Pokrovsk in the direction of Dobropolye after the resumption of attacks in this area in May. ISW recently assessed that these offensives are aimed both at enveloping Pokrovsk and at creating a salient that would allow Russian forces to attempt, in the long term, to envelop Konstantinovka and the broader Ukrainian fortification belt, a series of fortified towns that form the backbone of Ukraine's defensive positions. Putin's army has been unable to make any significant advance west of Toretsk towards Konstantinovka since June, which is why the Kremlin has shifted its priorities in favor of Pokrovsk. One of the Z channels reported that the Russian armed forces unsuccessfully tried to advance in the Novokonomichesky area. It is possible that Putin's army will now try to break through the defensive positions of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Rodinsky area in order to force the Ukrainian forces to retreat from Pokrovsk and Mirnograd under the threat of encirclement. After that, the enemy will probably again take a course for Konstantinovka. Ukrainian troops are defending Konstantinovka in the Donetsk region under difficult conditions. This town is located right in the path of Russia's summer offensive, which makes its defense a very important task, writes the New York Times. The Ukrainian military told journalists that Konstantinovka is the southern gateway to the chain of towns that form the last major defensive belt in the Donetsk region. According to them, if the Russians occupy Konstantinovka, almost all cities located further north will be within range of enemy drones, which will bring the Russian Federation closer to the complete capture of the region. The publication emphasizes that the Russians have created a 16-kilometer zone around the Ukrainian troops defending Konstantinovka, partially surrounding them from the east, south and west. In a conversation with journalists, Ukrainian soldiers and officers said that almost every movement in this zone is monitored around the clock by Russian drones.
The American press has posted an exclusive audio recording from 2024 online, in which Trump tells his sponsors about conversations with Putin and Xi. The US president admitted that he threatened Putin to attack Moscow if he decided to invade Ukraine, CNN reports. According to Trump, Putin did not believe what was said. However, as the US president said, the Russian president was still about 10% ready to take Trump's words seriously. Later, Trump addressed Xi Jinping with a similar text. He declared his readiness to bomb Beijing if China decides to annex Taiwan militarily. Like Putin, the Chinese leader also did not believe Trump's words. At the same time, the US president for some reason believes that Xi Jinping took his words seriously by 10%. At the same time, CNN journalists do not report when exactly Trump said such words to the leaders of Russia and China. If about Ukraine, then back in the years of his first presidency. Earlier, media reported that the Western press decided to look into Trump's turn towards Ukraine. Political scientists are confident that Trump's decision to resume military aid supplies to Ukraine is not a strategic turn towards Kyiv, but a temporary concession. In fact, Trump is afraid of tarnishing his reputation if Ukraine does fall in the fight against Putin, so with his decision Trump wants to avoid a complete defeat of Ukraine, The Economist reports. When the Pentagon decided to suspend military aid to Ukraine, it came as an unpleasant surprise to both Washington's allies and the US State Department. However, Trump later said that Ukraine needed to be armed so that it could defend itself from attacks by the Kremlin. The Pentagon's claims of reviewing its weapons stockpiles were in fact disinformation. Experts say the US does have problems with air defense systems, but Ukraine gets the lion's share of its weapons not from Pentagon warehouses, but from production lines. With his decision, Trump humiliated the Pentagon and also showed that his decisions can come as a complete surprise even to his closest circle. At the same time, there is no need to rejoice that Trump allegedly went over to Ukraine's side. Supplies of more weapons that were provided for during Biden's presidency have been resumed. Trump's new budget does not mention Ukraine or aid for it. The biggest positive in all of this, Trump finally realized that Putin had been fooling him and leading him by the nose all this time. Also, if the US abandons Ukraine, this move will be an even greater geopolitical disaster than the fall of Afghanistan in 2021.
Putin, I said, if you go in to Ukraine, we're going to bomb out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice. The public wants the public. So he goes like, I don't believe you. He said no way, and I said way. And then he goes like, I don't believe you, but the truth is he believed me 10%. And I told you this, he believed me 10%. Then I'm with President Xi of China, but I said the same thing to them. I said, you know, if you go into Taiwan, I'm going to bomb the out of Beijing. He thought I was crazy. He said, Beijing! You're going to bomb Beijing. I said, I have no choice. I got to bomb them. We're going to bomb Beijing. And he didn't believe me either, except 10%. And 10% is all you need. In fact, 5% would have been okay too. And we never had a problem. We would have never had a problem.